Samira, welcome. So it's over to you. We are so happy to have you. You're tuning in from San Francisco?
Yeah, south of the city.
Fantastic. And I would imagine the weather there is probably as nice as it is in London. Is it sunny?
Yeah, it's quite sunny outside right now. It's lovely.
It's very rare that it will be as sunny as it is right now in London, but we're happy. We can't complain because London's weather is very unpredictable and most of the times it's very rainy. So Samira, you have a story for us to tell, and I wouldn't want to take up any of your time. So please, it's over to you. And everyone, Samira is joining us from salesforce.org. So this is the Salesforce Foundation, not the Salesforce proper. And we are really looking forward to hearing Samira speak right now. And I'm going to mute myself. Thank you, Samira.
Sure. So as Elena mentioned, Salesforce.org is the social impact business unit of Salesforce.com, which is a large technology company. And I was delighted by this opportunity to speak to you all because we're doing a lot of interesting work in many different areas that's very relevant. So I just wanted to pause for a second because when I was asked to speak about artificial intelligence, I started thinking about really what is it? And when I think of AI, the first thing that comes to mind is power. So artificial intelligence enables you to make decisions in a smarter way with the underlying data and knowledge. It allows you to make decisions theoretically in a cheaper way. It allows you to make decisions in a more efficient and effective way over time. And to me, knowledge and information, whether through AI or otherwise, has always been this notion of knowledge and power. Those who have the information tend to be able to control systems and govern things. So then when I paused, what I just shared with you isn't really the locus of power for artificial intelligence. Power is really going to come from how do we make artificial intelligence accessible? Accessible not only to the universities and corporations that have the money and the power to implement it and use it, but how do we make artificial intelligence accessible to hard to reach populations and social enterprises on the ground, whether in Asia or Africa or certain communities in Europe, in the cities that are harder to reach? How do we ensure that artificial intelligence is being used responsibly, that the insights are being applied responsibly? How do we ensure that AI is being used ethically? So these, to me, are the most important questions. And at salesforce.org, I've been working at the intersection of technology and social good for a long time. And that's why another question in my mind is also, how do you unleash the power of AI for good? So all of this data, all of this knowledge is only good insofar as how you apply it. And anytime we think about power, which is really relevant to the current sort of system we have today and the social justice issues we see emerging, the income inequality across the globe. Anytime we think about power, we have to think about the systems, the structures, and the rules that govern the power. And what are the incentives? What are players' incentives that cause them to act in one way or another? So then I started reflecting on my experiences at Salesforce and otherwise. And just from my vantage point, I think there's a lot of sort of activity and positive activity and kernels of wisdom that can be garnered from some of the actions of tech companies. So on my team, which is the impact management team, we like to think about the positive and the negative impact of every action taken by every organization, whether they're a nonprofit or they're a corporation. We also like to think about the positive and negative actions taken by individuals. So any given thing can be used to have a positive impact, but at the same rate, there may be the same negative consequences. If you look at the marketplace today, there are a number of AI-enabled solutions working on climate change, on health, on education, really powerful tools. But at the same rate, there might be some negative consequences, especially if people and institutions and schools, let's say, don't have equal access to the AI-enabled educational tools, if the same type of health access doesn't exist across the same populations in the same country, then AI no longer becomes positive. It no longer even remains neutral. In that case, it has negative implications. So on my team, we're constantly trying to think about how do you measure and manage positive impact against potential negative impact as well as harms. In addition to just thinking about how to measure, the consequences of the solutions you're designing and implementing, another important piece is investment and partnership. So Salesforce has made a very significant, monumentous investment in the Office of Ethical and Humane Use, which is about the ethical and humane use of technology, of which AI is part and parcel to that. In addition to that, I think it's important to think about other players in the ecosystem who are leading the way and how one can educate together and work with them. I know there's a strong humane tech culture in San Francisco. And to me, it's very important to plug into those discussions and to listen to the latest buzz around AI and around the way in which technology is being used. There's also this notion of elevating different voices because different people are having different experiences with new technology. So being able to elevate their stories and their voices really educates us collectively on the impacts of technology. So as I was thinking about various leaders in the technology space, whether using AI or otherwise, I started thinking about Facebook. Facebook has come under significant scrutiny these days for various decisions. At the same rate, in a world where things are developing, they're evolving so quickly, an entirely new space is being developed. It's more than natural and it's inevitable that they would be facing questions that they have never answered before. There's so much power that comes with being able to use the data that they have access to. So it is only natural that they would want to, and that they are, in fact, helping shape the rules around it. Because with any given power structure, locus of power, comes responsibility. So, in my view, big tech companies not only should, but they actually have a responsibility to contribute through investments, through education, through their talent to these new spaces of technology, such as AI. They have a responsibility for partnering with others in communities on the ground to help shape our future and the future trajectory. So now I'd like to just take a few steps back because you all are much earlier in your career than I am. I studied management science and engineering as a student at Stanford. It's really an interdisciplinary degree, a little bit of policy, a little bit of engineering with your traditional engineers. And I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do with it. I had spent a lot of time earlier volunteering at community organizations. I had gone to South Asia quite often and seen dire poverty on the ground. So I knew in my heart that I wanted to have a social impact or social good. But how I would use my education for that, I had no idea. And there was one particular course that really struck me called Ethics and Public Policy. And at the same rate, I was pursuing a concentration in technology transfer. So I really began thinking about these questions around ethical use of technology. What types of frameworks need to guide the ethical use of technology? We looked at numerous cases. I remember one around assisted physician death and just a lot of fascinating challenges and problems that organizations would face as technology evolved came to mind. And so, because of that, immediately after Stanford, I went to pursue a master in public policy at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. But even after my master's, I still didn't know how to bring it all together or what to do. And back then, which was over 12 years ago, there was really three paths you could go on. You could either join a government or an intergovernmental organization and work in development or policy making and have an impact there. You could go join a traditional corporation, which at the time CSR activities were quite light, or corporate social responsibility was quite light, only done by some of the most leading players, really, in a way that was, or that represented greater investment. Or you could go work for a nonprofit. There were public private partnerships emerging, but it certainly wasn't the space that we see today. So I ended up, after graduate school, working on the ground in Bangladesh with acid violence victims, very close to the community, women who had been burnt with acid, who had been shut out of their communities, shut out of their families, weren't able to gain employment because of the burns on their faces that were done mostly or primarily in an act of revenge. After that experience, I had already secured a job with Accenture's public service strategy practice, and that sort of kicked off this first phase of my career in consulting, working across different industries and different groups. And now, fast forward, I'm at Salesforce, and what I've noticed is in this time, there's been an increasing convergence across the sectors. There's been more and more cross sector work. Not only is there more cross-sector work, though, I think that the lines are really blurring between the sectors. You see impact investors, so the impact community, impact investment community is very forward-looking. They want to invest in high-value solutions in health and education, and they want to help reduce poverty. You see corporations doing more and more. Salesforce talks about business as a platform for good. It's very much a part of our culture, a part of our purpose. You're seeing governments working more with private actors. There's so much activity. And I really feel that AI can be used as a framework to shape the conversation across all three sectors together to look at impact in a more similar way and to really figure out what are the systems behind it and what can each player bring to the table to advance social good using AI. So it's a really, really powerful framework that I think is unleashing sort of systems change and systems thinking and a number of different solutions and activities on the ground. I was looking at something the other day put together by rainmaking.io called the SDG Compass, and they had mapped all of the social purpose startups and social innovation oriented organizations or enterprises on the ground and the various sustainable development goals that were being tackled and targeted. And it's amazing to see the amount and the sort of power and innovation that can be unleashed toward the SDGs. And so just fast forward, thinking about the communities I've worked in, the type of problems I've seen on the ground. As I started this conversation, I would like to end on a similar note in that I think it's very, very important to think about how AI can be used to harness insights from the communities and to really get us closer to one another. I truly think that artificial intelligence not only is an advancement in technology, but represents a way to potentially leapfrog some of the existing inequalities that exist in society. Two interesting solutions that I'd love to share with you that I came across in some of my recent readings. One is the Upright Project, which comes out of Finland, where they're using AI and mining various academic articles to really figure out what is the net impact, the positive and the negative impact of various industries, given the types of corporations that are present in those industries and the products they're releasing into the world. So they've created a scorecard around various stakeholders and the health and environmental impacts around sort of giving a full picture of net impact of these corporations. So I find that a very interesting usage of AI. In addition, there's a tool called 60 decibels, which is being used by community workers and individuals on the ground through the mobile phone to implement surveys that allows us to get closer to the ground and get insights from communities, which I think is very interesting. And those are the types of insights I couldn't have gotten 12 years ago about women sitting in Bangladesh. But now I might be able to, and I might actually be able to mine the data and use the insights that are derived from AI. So I think it's a very, very promising space. But as I mentioned, AI is power. It comes with significant responsibility. The structures still are being developed, the principles, the rules, and the norms that govern it. And when I think about this, this is a shared responsibility across organizations and corporations, and most importantly, across generations. So I'm bringing all of these experiences that I've seen through the evolution, through time. You're bringing fresh perspectives, knowledge from on the ground, things you've tested. We need to bring it together to create a positive and responsible culture around AI. So I'd love to leave you with two questions. Firstly, how do you intend to use artificial intelligence or technology to unleash it for the greater good of society? And secondly, also, how do you plan to do that or intend to do that in a way that is responsible and ethical? Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Samira. That was fantastic. And I believe you're one of the few speakers we've had without any slides. So I could tell this, it really came from you and with so much passion. So I'm really happy and really grateful you have come to share your passion for AI. I find it very curious that you're describing AI as a framework. For a while, I couldn't find the right word to describe because AI is more than just a technology. So I'm really glad you have brought this word to me, and it made me reflect as well, because there is a lot more around AI and debates around AI that we should all be aware of and mindful. So the teenagers we have, they are developing 11 different projects, and they are all in different kind of spaces. So some of the teenagers are attempting to tackle mental health, others education, yet others deforestation. And I'm even seeing one team that is trying to create this communication system between charities and refugee camps or refugees, where everything seems to have fallen apart due to the lockdown. So where in the past they were able to communicate face to face, right now it's become even more challenging during the times of COVID. I'm wondering whether you could recommend any specific ways they could look into business models and innovation, or any innovative partnerships you have seen that are working out there, particularly in the space of AI for good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mentioned a few of them in my talk, and then I can build upon that. So one that I think is really interesting is the Upright project, which would enable some of these teams to really think about what are the positive and negative impacts of the work that they're doing. Now, the Upright sort of project technology has generally been applied to corporations, so I haven't yet seen it be applied to projects, but there might be something there, might be sort of a way for them to reach out to the project and see if they're willing to take on these team engagements and potentially help them develop frameworks around positive and negative impact. So as they're implementing, designing, and testing, they're also able to track the positive and negative impact. As I mentioned in my talk, the Upright project is really looking at academia and academic research. So the only thing I would like to point out with any of this sort of AI-enabled existing tools is that they're really dependent on data and how high quality the data is and how evenly sort of distributed the data is in terms of the target populations. A lot of the data that exists, let's say in the US, is for white populations of a certain sort of socioeconomic class. So anything that's being done today, I'd say should be taken with a grain of salt. And so in that regard, I think that these teams could really partner with corporations, large corporations, by actively reaching out to them and asking them how they can contribute to the conversation around equal access, or creating a pool of data that's available that could help inform their projects. I mean, I know Salesforce alone sort of has a great AI solution called Einstein, and it's being applied through our Customer 360 platform and is being applied across sectors and is being used in a very, very interesting way. But then again, it's using the existing data pools that already exist. So I think there's something greater to be done around sort of voice and movement building and really action from the ground that is calling for this sort of investment in greater data across hard to reach populations, across harder to reach social causes. You can imagine if the education and health sector are already underfunded, they don't have a whole lot of data. They don't have the right technical expertise to collect the data, the right technology. I think these teams can be asking technology companies to do more with their sort of pro bono and philanthropic programs. I know Salesforce.org has a free licenses program. We do a lot of pro bono technical assistance with our employees. So the next question would be, how can we build the AI space in partnership with some of these teams, maybe supporting some of these teams and then taking it further? I mean, that's where I would focus my energy. The last thing I'll mention is there's an organization in the Bay Area where I live called AI for All, and their entire mandate is really to make artificial intelligence more accessible by training the next generation of artificial intelligence professionals and investing in them, and also calling to the private sector and governments to think hard about the types of data they're using, because if we only have data that's representative of particular populations, you can imagine how it's going to skew the solutions. So I know that was a long-winded roundabout answer, but it gives you some levers to pull at least.
Amazing. And so, Samira, where do you see AI making the most impact in, say, 5 years from now? What is it that you're most excited about, and where would you like to see that impact happen?
So I'm a bit biased because, as I mentioned, my background, I have spent a lot of time on the ground with communities in hard to reach communities, impoverished communities in Malaysia, India, elsewhere. And so I really would like to see AI be used as an equalizer, as a way to basically, as I mentioned, gain these insights that we haven't been able to gain for years about communities on the ground using mobile technology, and in particular using voice with populations that are illiterate or don't speak English. And once we're able to learn more about these communities, I think we will be able to better serve them with solutions that are emerging from the private sector as well as governments and other entities. So I really want to see AI be used as an equalizer and to leapfrog some of the social injustice and inequalities we've seen, by making it cheaper to get those insights and making them sort of more usable and more trustworthy.
Perfect. No, I share your passion. I've also lived in Bangladesh for a little bit in an area called Chittagong Hill Tract. Yes, and that was quite an interesting experience for me as well. But we worked at that time at UNDP, so also a lot of community work. So I do share your passion for technology making a difference in communities. So my next question would be, again, teams are really busy this week, sort of trying to understand their business models, the partnerships and whatnot. But at the same time, we're asking them to look into the ethics and really consider using technology responsibly. In your opinion, given you are in the middle of all of these debates and discussions, what do you think they should be mindful of?
I think that's, first of all, I want to applaud your teams for even thinking about it. It's extremely difficult while pursuing sort of funding and partnerships and driving innovation to think about anything like sort of ethics. It's often the last thing on sort of organizations' minds. So I think that's amazing. I would say to be really mindful of data and how data is used. So to the extent that they are tapping into private individuals' data, I would think about the entire sort of value chain and potential future scenarios and the way in which data can be used. Because right now we see big tech under scrutiny, but we will also begin to see sort of enterprises being judged. And if your constituents, your customers, those you're serving on the ground don't trust you, then they're not going to use the solution and the solution's not going to scale. So think about responsible usage of data, what you want to communicate on that, how you want to ensure that, and how to be authentic and upfront about the challenges that might exist with whichever population you're trying to serve and whoever's data that you might be using.
Perfect. All right, fantastic. So that was great, and thank you so much, Samira, for joining us all the way from San Francisco. And that was from sales.org. If you don't mind, I will connect one or two teams to you, particularly the ones that are doing tackling community work in Africa, and I feel like they would really benefit from speaking to you, if you don't mind at all, because they are at the moment doing something that you've just mentioned, a voice solution for refugee camps where, you know, a lot of people are quite illiterate, but they still need to maintain that connection with charities, and it's become really, really difficult during COVID times. So in my mind, I felt like you would be a perfect person for them to speak to because of your experience with communities locally, and perhaps you know, Salesforce.org is already doing something in that space as well. So, but thank you so much for joining us, and it was a real pleasure having you. So everyone, we do have a question actually, and I think it is, I almost missed it, so it literally just came a second ago. So currently one of the scariest impacts of AI is the fact that it is taking over some people's jobs. Is there a way AI can help compensate the people who got unemployed? That just came through. So Samira, if you are able to respond to that question.
Hi.
Did you hear the question, or shall I repeat that?
No, I heard that. So basically, it's how can AI be used to help those who are unemployed? Is that correct?
Yes. How can AI help compensate, the people who got unemployed due to COVID or whatnot just now?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind, and I was thinking about this right before getting on the call, and aligns to some of my background as well. I think that sort of thinking about where the future opportunity lies is really important, and the evolution of industry. So the extent to which young people and others can be resilient and adaptive and continuously learn is important. So I think AI definitely represents a field that is growing. So one way would be to just tap into some of the boot camps that exist and the free resources that exist to really get up to speed on AI. And explore sort of potential career opportunities in that space and in the data space, because I see that as being a growing field. And as I mentioned, I had no idea how I was going to use my education when I was studying. And over time, I've learned to sort of learn and relearn. I just started another course recently, and I'm like a mid-career because I see, you know, different jobs emerging, the different jobs of the future, and I want to stay at the forefront of that. So just keeping a growth mindset, keeping an open mind. I'm happy, whoever sent that question, I'm happy to look into what are sort of the free resources that exist for getting up to speed on AI. I'm happy to try to tap into existing networks to see if they're looking for any specific type of talent. So I'd like to make myself available like that, because what I was going to say earlier when you said you'd put a few teams in touch with me, you know, it's not just sort of about my current position, but there's sort of others in the network, whether it's other for-profit companies or other organizations on the ground. I'm happy to tap into my network. So I would say it does represent an important skill of the future. And if we can get more people sort of up to speed, it's a gap that needs to be filled. And I'm happy to point people in the right direction.
That sounds fantastic. We definitely will take advantage of your offer, Samira, because we will be running a global hackathon in October to celebrate Ada Lovelace Day, and we will need all the support we can possibly get to make this happen in a way where everyone, you know, is able to understand the significance of AI, particularly young women who we're desperately trying to attract into technologies. So someone like you would be the first person I would definitely email and ask you for help. Thank you so much, Samira. All right, so everyone is really grateful and saying thank you to you on YouTube. They have all been listening to your talk. So thank you, Samira, for joining us from San Francisco. And we are going to close this live stream today. We've only had 2 talks, and that is because I know every team is super busy today. And so we are going to close now, and I'm going to see you back here at 5 o'clock tomorrow, where we will have somebody joining us from IBM. And then also remember, on Thursday, we will have Harriet Green joining us with an inspiring talk, which is titled The Power of You. And you really don't want to miss that. I'm really looking forward to hosting Harriet here live on YouTube. So I will be seeing you all soon tomorrow, and have a great evening.